Welcome to the Child, Youth, and Protection Policy Rescreening process. Thank you for volunteering with the First United Methodist Church of Plant City. This is an important part of what we do every year. It's in order to keep our children safe. So every year, this is something we have to do in order to keep in our guidelines with the conference and the district of the United Methodist Church. So in order to help save some time with you, and we're going to start looking at doing this online. So as long as you're willing to use your time in this way and make sure that you do it, we can continue to do it this way. Otherwise, we're going to make you come back in and sit through our trainings at the church. So let's get started. We have both Philip here and Shauna, both the youth minister and the children's director here. And we're going to get through this, and at the end you'll have some questions and a chance to ask questions, and we'll be able to follow up with you. All right, so why do we have the child protection policy? Well, it's simply for the protection of the children. We have there's been so many standards of the secular world, and we have to make sure that the church is a safe place for our children. Our baptismal covenant says that with God's help, we'll proclaim the good news of Christ and live according to the example of Christ. We will surround our children in the churches with a community of love and forgiveness, that they may grow in their service to others. We will pray for them that they may be true disciples who walk in the ways that lead to life. Now, in all that, unfortunately, in the world today, there are so many statistics and so much that happens in the form of child abuse. So here are some of those statistics. 3 million cases of child abuse gets reported annually. This represents 5 million children. There's 1 million of those cases are confirmed. That means there are 8,219 cases each day, which boils down to 342 each hour, 6 every minute, and 1 every 10 seconds. That is way too much. And unfortunately, some of that happens in the church. There are 70 abuse allegations by churches weekly. And unfortunately, our district is no exception. The South Central District is no exception. Shauna Cook is going to tell you some examples of some that happened in our district.
In our district, within the last 10 years, Forest Hills United Methodist Church and Cork United Methodist Church are 2 churches that have had reported cases of child abuse. And without going into detail, it just hits home that this is happening, close. And that in our church, it's not a matter of if something will happen, it's just a matter of when. So it's just super important that you as volunteers and we as staff stay as up to date and current as possible so that we can protect our children and ourselves. One in 4 sexually are assaulted by the age of 18. 85% of these children could be somebody that they know. 1,416 in Hillsborough County, 973 in Tampa, 23 in Valrico, 37 in the Brandon area. And within a 5-mile radius of our church, First Church of Plant City, there are roughly 106 registered sex offenders. We're going to now move in to the different types of abuse. Definition of child abuse is any willful act or threatened act that results in any physical, mental, sexual injury or harm that causes or is likely to cause the child's physical, mental, or emotional health to be significantly impaired. Corporal discipline of a child by a parent or legal custodian for disciplinary purposes only does not in itself constitute abuse when it does not result in harm to the child. That is the Florida statute. But physical abuse is violent, non-accidental contact which results in injury. Here are some physical indicators of of physical abuse. Unexplained bruises, welts, burns, lacerations, abrasions in suspicious areas. Normal bruising areas for children include the forehead, elbows, knees, shins. Locations of injury. Suspicious areas in the front, in the facial area, the groin area, upper thighs. Suspicious bruising areas in the back of the upper leg and the lower leg. Behavioral indicators. You will notice that some children will have extreme aggression, withdrawal, be overly compliant, depressed, hyperactive. Behavioral indicators, again, being afraid of parents, of going home, of physical contact, afraid when other kids cry.
Now, when sexual abuse happens, sexual abuse is any form of sexual activity with a youth. Physical indicators of sexual abuse is difficulty walking, sitting, pregnancy, bloody or stained or torn underwear. Physical indicators also include bruises or bleeding in the external genitalia, vaginal or anal areas, venereal diseases. Now, behavioral indicators are unwilling to change for Jim, sexual knowledge beyond age, sexually acting out, and there's sometimes others or sometimes none. Emotional abuse is a pattern of intentional conduct which crushes a child's spirit. Physical indicators of this is speech disorders, lags in physical development, failure to thrive. Behavioral indicators of this include habit disorders, learning disorders, sleep disorders, poor self-concept, extremes in behavior. Along with all these abuses, neglect can sometimes be considered abuse. Failure to provide for a child's basic needs is neglect. Physical indicators of this is constant hunger, poor hygiene, inappropriate dress, lack of supervision, unattended medical needs. Behavioral indicators are begging or stealing food, constant fatigue, developmental lags, seeks attention and affection. Behavioral indicators are different, and things we need to be careful about is, of all of these, is that it presents differently with each child. We have to be aware of cultural differences as well. There may be no indicators at all that there's abuse or neglect happening. And behaviors may relate to other disorders. Now, a profile of an abuser. It can be any occupation, any race or ethnic group, any economic or social group, any gender, any age, any marital status, any sexual orientation. Can be anyone. A profile of an abuser is someone who's probably been abused as a child. However, people who were abused as a child do not all abuse. But most who do abuse were abused. Additional stressors are substance abuse, marital problems, emotional problems, or job problems. So if you know the families of the children and you know things are going on in the families, we can often watch for these signs with the children as well. A profile of a physical abuser: negative attitude, hot temper, low self-esteem, or blames others. Profile of a sexual abuser: desires power and control, poor impulse control, manipulative, moves frequently. Profile of a sexual abuser: excessive interest in children and tries to be alone with them. Grooming behaviors of a sexual abuser: engages child's parents. They want to be close. They slowly develop the relation with a child. If a child does not object to the relationship, they continue that relationship, it gets stronger and stronger and stronger as it continues.
Now we're going to move into responding to abuse. And just know that with all of these definitions and indicators and things to watch for, it doesn't mean that we're looking for every little thing. Because a lot of these can be behaviors of just regular, ordinary children. But again, like I said earlier, in our church, it's just not a matter of if something will happen. It's just a matter of when. So when we respond to allegations, we want you to acknowledge, facilitate, and act. So, if a child comes to you and is disclosing information, first of all, there's a reason that they chose you. So, a couple of things need to be on the back of our minds. And here's what you're probably thinking. Kids wouldn't lie. Our pastor wouldn't do that. He was only alone with him for a minute. Women don't do that. He's never been like that with me. It would ruin her reputation if I report. But he's a doctor, a Sunday school teacher, but she's the chair of staff parish, neighborhood police officer. Reporting abuse. Any suspicion of abuse, reporting is mandated by law and confidentiality of the reporter. Here are 1-800 reporting abuse lines. This is for suspected abuse by persons responsible for a child's welfare. Reporting abuse. Report to local law enforcement for suspected abuse by non-caretaker. Reporting abuse policy. Our first and foremost is for the child's safety. That child will need to be removed, the accused, will need to be removed from the group. Our policy here is if it is happening in our church or we even suspect that it is happening, if it was in youth department or children's department, and you notice this, you're going to first notify those directors, who we will then in turn notify the pastor, the district, notify the parents. Now, if the parents are the accused, we're going to follow the advice of the authorities. Reporting abuse policy. Notify accused if staff or volunteer. Share only that allegation has been made. Reporting abuse policy. We will have a written report and only predetermined spokespersons speak to the media. Facilitating a disclosure. Again, if a child comes to you and is disclosing any information, there is a reason that they chose you. So what is a child's greatest fear? No one's going to believe them. Someone's going to get hurt. The offender will go to jail. Family might possibly be split up. And here is that reason. That child has a reason for choosing you and for choosing you right now. So, in the event that that happens, we want you to first relax. Do not react with shock or disgust or disbelief. Go slowly. Use open-ended questions or tell me more. Avoid leading or yes or no questions. Use the language of the child. Allow the child to determine how much to disclose. Affirm that child's courage to come to you. Reassure that help is available and explain what will happen next.
Now, once a child's come to you and disclosed this information, there's care that needs to happen. We're in a church, we want to care for people. The immediate care is ABCs. We need to acknowledge what they've said, we need to be there for them, and we need to care for them. Victims are never responsible for causing the abuse. Often they blame themselves. They must have done something to cause this. They are never responsible for causing the abuse. They're never to be blamed for whatever happens. They're never capable of consent for the abuse. Child sexual abuse. Abuser is always wrong. They are solely responsible for their actions. When we care for victims, we ensure proper mental health care is done by professionals. Unless you've been trained and certified, we do not have the training to care for them. We need to refer them to the professionals. We can be there for them. However, a lot of times issues that they may have are trust, spiritual, emotional, and physical. Their reactions often are fear, guilt, anger, and shame. Possible outcomes of victims are aggressiveness, depression, low self-esteem, and boundary difficulties. Also promiscuity, dependency problems. They can sometimes develop tough skin toward other people, always pushing them away, or want to rescue others that have gone through the same thing. Now, along with the actual victim, other people are affected as well. These people that are affected are family members, peers, other students involved in the ministry, other workers, the congregation, and family of the accused abuser. But also, what about the offenders? Do they belong in the church? Yes. How can we help them? The church is about helping people, caring, loving people. Can they be cured? It's a big question. So, with offenders, we often need to develop a covenant, not unlike this policy. Covenant partners, people to keep them accountable. Counseling is required. Off-limit areas. The Book of Resolutions in 2004 listed areas such as the child's floor, the youth floor in our buildings. Those are off-limit areas. The nursery would be an off-limit area. Unacceptable discipline. So when a child does something, you're working in the youth department or the children's department or the nursery department. There are acceptable discipline and unacceptable discipline. Corporal punishment. You can't hit a kid. Shoving, pushing, poking, kicking. You're stronger than they are. Don't do it. Yelling, screaming. Belittling or humiliation. Even though it may be fun, sarcastic and degrading remarks isn't a good thing. They need their self-esteem. Confinement. Acceptable discipline. We need to encourage. Find out why they acted the way and correct the behavior. Reinforcing. Giving alternatives. Giving consequences is okay. They need to understand there's consequences to their behaviors. Just like God has consequences for our choices, they have consequences for their behavior. Setting limits. That's for their safety. Timeouts. Diversions. When we do this, we need to speak to them respectfully, calmly, in a low tone. We need to listen. Find out why they did what they did. Establish a trust between them. The discipline needs to be appropriate to the developmental level of the child. How you discipline a child that's a first grader versus a child that's an 11th grader needs to be different. Interesting activities with a high level of involvement. If they're not interested, they're going to act out.
Boundaries. When you're working with children, when you're working with infants, and when you're working with teenagers, and because we are adults, and because we have to be careful to protect them as well as ourselves, we have to understand that when it comes to touch and things like this, there are boundaries. So careful use of hand, shoulder, upper back. Never touch a child or a youth in areas where a bathing suit is going to cover. You need to make sure that you're in the presence of other adults. So we never touch against a child's will. And again, coming back to, cultural differences, economic differences, just where children are coming from. We have a lot of children and youth that come from not really our home church. So they're in the community. You don't know where they're coming from. And physical touch might be fearful for them. So if you go to, give a child a little pat on the back and they shy away from you, probably not a good idea to do that. So again, never against a child's will. If the child is uncomfortable, it could be overstimulating for them. No roughhousing, no massages, no sitting in laps of older children, no embarrassing students about their bodies. So our role, we are the teacher, we're the directors, we're their leaders. We are not their best friends. This is a real important boundary, that not everything is confidential. So if abuse and neglect is suspected, potential danger to self or to others. So here we get into the policy itself, where how we need to supervise our children. So the protection policy says that for one screened adult is okay, but 2 is recommended, and 2 screened adults is preferred. Supervision recommendations, reasonable ratios. Under 3 years of age, it's around 3 children to 1 adult. 3 to 6 years of age is 5 children to 1 adult. 7 and up, that ratio is 7 to 1. The protection policy also says that we should sign our children in and out. In our church, anything in the policy that is a guideline, they would like to do that, and we can kind of get away from the minimum. But anything that is required, we have to follow. So any children that is of nursery age up through 2nd grade, they have to be signed in and out. And it's recommended for grades 3 and 5. And in children's ministry, we just do it all the way across the board. It just saves time. So here is the training, and I'm going to explain what each one of these are when it comes to the policy, because you're probably thinking, well, I've done this already. So as an adult, as an adult volunteer, when you are first coming in and you're going through this training, your initial training is the very first thing that happens. And every year, we're going to offer a refresher training. That is what is going to be done manually. Now, in 5 years, because you love children and youth ministry so much and you're still hanging on as a volunteer, first of all, thank you. And second of all, you have to do this whole thing all over again. And that is from the application through the annual training, through the background check, the whole 9 yards. So we want to thank you for this portion of the training. And now we're going to move into a real sensitive area known as self-injury.
Well, give yourself a pat on the back, because we only have about 11 more slides left, and we're on our last section. So you're almost done. Thanks for sticking with us. So self-injury is almost it is an abuse, but it's self-abuse. And it is one of the harder ones to actually find a lot of the times and help. 1 in 5 young women and 1 in 7 young men are found to have engaged in some form of self-injurious behavior for the purpose of managing their emotions. 90% of those who self-injure begin as teenagers. That age is actually starting to go down. The average self-injurer begins at age 14, but it continues all the way into their 20s. But as I said, the age is starting to go down even into about 7 years old. Some self-injury is a learned behavior. It's something they see, and it's something they want to imitate, actually. More than half of self-injurers are victims of sexual abuse, and virtually all report emotional abuse or neglected childhoods. So we can look to see, okay, are these victims of sexual abuse? And watch for that. Or are they emotionally abused? Are they neglected? Do they have any things of those areas that may lead them toward this area? Self-injury is prevalent in all races and economic backgrounds. It has happened in this church multiple times. And so it is here in this church, it's common, unfortunately, and so we do have to be careful. Sometimes self-injury is called self-inflicted violence, self-injury, self-harm, self-abuse, or cutting. It is an attempt to alter a mood state by inflicting physical harm serious enough to cause tissue damage. It can be inflicted by carving, cutting, branding, burning, bruising, scratching, or interfering with natural healing of the skin. Now, what it isn't. It is not a half-hearted attempt at suicide. Self-injury is a temporary solution to a permanent problem. Suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Self-injurers want to live. What we mean by that is self-injury is a way for them to escape their emotions, because when they cut, they get a release of endorphins. So their problems become easier to handle because they're able to control something. Their permanent problem is the self-injury. Suicide becomes a permanent problem, but it's because of temporary problems that they would have been able to get over if they had the help. It isn't body modification to the extreme. Body modification would be tattoos, piercings, gauges, stuff like that. This is a problem. It isn't demon possession. It's an immature attempt to get attention. Or it isn't an immature attempt to get attention. This is a problem. This is something that if you see it, we need to help them get some help. It's an escape from emptiness, depression, pain. It helps ease tension by releasing the endorphins. It provides relief from uncontrollable feelings. It escapes numbness. Sometimes they don't feel anything, and so they feel like they're just walking around. No one notices them. No one sees anything, and so just by cutting, they're able to feel something. It provides a sense of security. Sometimes they get into a ritual and they do the same thing over and over again. And so it's a security of this is something I can control and this is the same thing over and over again. To attain a feeling of euphoria. To prevent suicide. Sometimes they think, well, this is a step below and I'm not going to commit suicide if I'm doing this. It expresses emotional pain that's too great to bear. Sometimes they feel they can't communicate their pain, and so this is a way for them to communicate it. To influence the behaviors of others. Sometimes it's a cry of help, or sometimes they just want to see others react to it. To communicate the extent of their inner turmoil. Again, sometimes they can't communicate it, so sometimes this is the way they communicate it. Communicating a need for support. Dealing with feelings of alienation. Wounds that can serve as evidence of their real feelings. When they cut, it scars. Punishing oneself for feeling bad. Tend to have been abused as children. Exerting control over one's body. Sometimes children feel like they don't have any choices. They're told to go to school. They're told what homework. They're told they have tests. They're told they make their beds. They're told when to eat. Sometimes this is just the only choice they feel they have. Why it's hard to stop? Well, they think it doesn't hurt anyone but themselves. It's their body, so they can do what they want with it. Giving it up will only hurt them more. It's hard to stop. It demonstrates how much pain they're in. They're communicating with it. The scars remind them that they can manage their own pain. It pushes people away. That means the people won't get close. That way, the student won't be hurt again. They got hurt by someone. That's what they've started communicating. People may be disgusted by it. I deserve to be punished because I'm a horrible person. If I don't do this, then I will do something worse. Managing pain. Maybe this is the step down from suicide to them. So understanding this addiction, some of us may seem like, how could someone even do this? Well, it no longer feels like a choice sometimes. It just seems to happen. It becomes a habit. Addictive behaviors are not always about pain management. It's about increasing pleasure. Here are a couple scriptures that provide that. Hope and healing. That's what the church is about. Jesus gave us repentance, turning to a friend. We can be that friend in time. We're still a teacher in the classroom, but we can still be a friend that they can turn to. Challenge the lies. Challenge the lies that cutting and quote, pain management gives. We need to listen to them deeply. We need to offer acceptance to them. We need to allow them to have emotion. We need to be present. Sometimes just being there and listening and saying, it's going to be okay, is what they really need. And we need to be praying for them, whether we're there or not. Thank you for sitting through this rescreen, the yearly process. Below is a few questions that we need you to answer so that we know you did actually watch this whole video. It also has a question that says, yes, I actually watched the video. But below it's got a fill-in-the-blank box that if you saw something in here that we just quickly covered and you didn't quite understand and you'd like us to get back with you, this form comes back to myself and Shauna, and then we will be able to contact you and get in touch with you and communicate with you, and so that we can clear up any questions you might have. Thank you again for rescreening and volunteering with us.